Okay, friends, so yesterday we talked about the crucifixion, the death of Jesus, and tomorrow we're going to talk about the resurrection. What we're going to talk about today is a little bit different, and it's a little bit different from anything that we've done all the way through Matthew, because what we're talking about today is not recorded in the book of Matthew. In fact, it's not recorded in any of the other three Gospels either. What we're talking about today is something that we have to make a lot of assumptions around, but I think that it's a helpful exercise. It's something that can be powerful. Yesterday, we talked about Friday, the day of the crucifixion. Tomorrow, we're talking about Sunday, the day of the resurrection. What about Saturday? Again, Matthew's silent on it. But what can we assume is happening that day? Well, here's what we do know. We know that Saturday is the Sabbath, right? So it's the day of rest. It's the day that those people who knew Jesus, who loved Jesus, would have been at their homes. They would have been gathered together, reflecting on what had happened the day before. And it would have been a day, again, of rest where they couldn't be out and about. They couldn't be working and doing things like that. We don't know what they did that day, but can you imagine it? That's what I'm going to encourage you to do today, is to imagine what that Saturday was like. Imagine for Mary, the mother of Jesus, what that Saturday was like. Imagine for Mary Magdalene and the other women following Jesus, what that day was like. Imagine for Peter and James and John and the other disciples what that day was like. Imagine for the crowd that had been following him around that weren't his disciples, but yet still believed in who he was. For the kids who had laid down the palm branches. Imagine for the people that he had healed what that day was like. Because you see, we have the privilege of knowing that Sunday's coming. We have the privilege of knowing what's on the other side of Saturday. But of course, those men, women, and kids didn't. Everything pointed towards the fact that it was over. And imagine not just the sorrow and the grief, but imagine the confusion, the questions, the doubting of whether what Jesus said was true, the doubting of yourself that you could have believed these things about him. Imagine all those things. And then, of course, recognize that we often find ourselves in places like that, where we do have the privilege of knowing what happens on Sunday, but sometimes we forget it. And sometimes we remember it, but we don't live in light of it. But those moments when all hope seems lost, when there's no light at the end of that proverbial tunnel, when we're living in that metaphorical Saturday. Maybe we've moved on just a bit from like the trauma and the grief of what has just happened, but we feel like we're a long way from things being put back together. Have you been in one of those Saturday moments? Most of us have. So let's do two things. One, sit in that moment and kind of imagine what it would have been like for them to not know what was coming on the next day. Sit in that. And really sit there for a minute in that. Imagine what it would have been like for them. And imagine what it would be like for you to not have the hope of the resurrection, the hope in knowing that God puts things back together. And then after that, spend a few moments reflecting on the fact that you do know that Sunday's coming. That even though it feels hopeless and that it seems hopeless and that, every rational way to think through this, you can't find hope in the midst of it. Sit in that place and remind yourself that you do know that Sunday's coming. In some situations, Sunday comes in this life, that we see light come out of darkness, that we see life come out of death, joy out of sorrow, all those things. But remind yourself also that even if we don't see that resurrection in this life, that there is a next life, there is a new age, there's a coming kingdom where it's all put back together. Sit in that moment. Tomorrow, we'll talk about the significance of the resurrection, what it means, what it meant then, what it still means to us today, and what it looks like to be men and women and teenagers and kids who live as like resurrection people. But for today, pretend like it's Saturday and sit in that and see how it is that God might speak to you in those moments. I'm shorter than I normally am. And it's because the extra 4 or 5 minutes that you normally take to listen, just take the time to be quiet and to listen for what it is that God might be saying to you as you reflect on what that Saturday must have been like. God bless you, friends.